The snow fell steadily across the Montana wilderness as 42-year-old Samuel Crawford stepped onto the porch of his log cabin, listening to the winter wind whistle through the pine trees. His weathered hands gripped the warm coffee cup as he surveyed his ranch, a spread of land he had worked alone for the past 8 years since his brother died and left him the sole owner of the property. Samuel had built a successful cattle operation through hard work and careful management, but success had come at the cost of companionship. At 42, he had resigned himself to a solitary life, finding purpose in his work and contentment in the simple rhythms of ranch life. The nearest neighbor was 15 miles away, and the closest town, Cedar Falls, was a 3-hour ride through difficult terrain. That December evening, as Samuel prepared to settle in for another quiet night by the fire, he heard an unexpected sound cutting through the winter stillness, the clip-clop of horse hooves and the creak of wagon wheels approaching his cabin. Visitors were rare at any time of year, but in the middle of a snowstorm, they were almost unheard of. Samuel grabbed his coat and lantern, stepping out into the swirling snow to see who might be traveling in such weather. What he discovered was a lone figure driving a small wagon, hunched against the cold and clearly struggling to control the horses in the worsening conditions. As the wagon drew closer to the warm glow of his porch light, Samuel could see that the driver was a young woman, perhaps in her late 20s, wrapped in a grey wool shawl and clutching the reins with determination despite the obvious difficulty of her situation. Samuel called out, raising his lantern higher. "Are you all right? This is dangerous weather to be traveling alone." The woman pulled her wagon to a stop near his porch and looked up at him with tired but resolute eyes. "Sir, I am terribly sorry to disturb you, but I fear I have lost my way in the storm. I was trying to reach Cedar Falls, but the roads have become impossible to follow." Samuel could see that she was shivering from the cold, and her horses were showing signs of exhaustion. Cedar Falls is still hours away, and the storm is getting worse. "You cannot travel any further tonight. Please, come inside and warm yourself." The woman hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and necessity. "Sir, I do not want to impose on your hospitality. I am a stranger, and it would not be proper for me to stay in your home unchaperoned." Propriety will not keep you from freezing to death," Samuel replied gently but firmly. "I have a spare room, and you will be perfectly safe. In the morning, when the storm passes, I will help you find your way to town." With great reluctance, the woman accepted his offer. Samuel helped her down from the wagon, noting that she carried only a small leather satchel and a worn carpet bag that seemed to contain all her worldly possessions. "I am Samuel Crawford," he said as he led her toward the warmth of his cabin. "This is my ranch, such as it is." "I am Catherine Walsh," she replied, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I am grateful for your kindness, Mr. Crawford. I have been traveling for 3 days, and I had begun to fear I would not find shelter before the storm grew worse." Once inside the cabin, Samuel was struck by how the simple addition of another person transformed the space. Catherine stood near his fireplace, her dark hair coming loose from its pins and her cheeks flushed from the cold. Despite her obvious fatigue and the strain of travel, there was something dignified about her bearing that spoke of inner strength and good character. "Please, sit by the fire and warm yourself," Samuel said, adding another log to the flames. "I will prepare some hot food and tend to your horses." As Samuel busied himself with practical matters, he found himself curious about what had brought Catherine to this remote area in such harsh weather. When he returned from the barn, he found her sitting by the fire, looking more composed but still somewhat anxious. "Mr. Crawford," Catherine began hesitantly, "I feel I owe you an explanation for my presence here. I am not simply a lost traveler. I am what you might call a mail-order bride, though that arrangement has recently fallen through." Samuel set down the pot of stew he had been preparing and gave her his full attention. "I see. May I ask what happened?" Catherine's cheeks colored slightly with embarrassment. "I was corresponding with a gentleman in Cedar Falls, a Mr. Thomas Brennan, who advertised for a wife. We exchanged letters for several months, and he seemed like a decent man who wanted a partner to help him run his general store. But when I arrived in town yesterday, I discovered that Mr. Brennan had married someone else just 2 weeks ago." "That must have been quite a shock," Samuel said, feeling genuine sympathy for her situation. "Indeed. I had used all my savings to make the journey from Kansas, and now I find myself stranded with nowhere to go and very little money left. The boarding house in Cedar Falls was full, and the hotel was far too expensive for my limited resources. Samuel could see the quiet desperation in her eyes, though she was trying hard to maintain her composure. Here was a woman who had taken a tremendous risk in pursuit of a better life, only to find herself abandoned and alone in unfamiliar territory. "What will you do now?" Samuel asked gently. "I honestly do not know," Catherine admitted. "I have some skills that might allow me to find work. I can cook, sew, keep house, and manage basic bookkeeping. But opportunities for single women are limited in frontier towns, and I have no references or connections." As they shared the simple meal Samuel had prepared, Catherine told him more about her circumstances. She had been teaching school in a small Kansas town, but when the school board decided they needed a married woman for the position, she had been forced to leave. The mail-order marriage had seemed like her best opportunity for stability and companionship. "I realize how foolish it must seem," Catherine said, staring into her coffee cup. "Traveling halfway across the country to marry a man I had never met. But I had hoped to find a partner who would value my contributions and treat me with respect." "It does not seem foolish at all," Samuel replied. "It seems brave. You were willing to take a risk to build a better life for yourself." As the evening wore on, Samuel found himself genuinely enjoying Catherine's company. She was intelligent and well-spoken, with a dry sense of humor that emerged once she began to relax. More importantly, she treated him with the kind of respect and interest that he had not experienced in years of solitary living. When it came time to retire for the evening, Samuel showed Catherine to his spare room, which was simple but clean and comfortable. "I hope you will be able to rest well," he said. "Tomorrow we can discuss your options and figure out the best way to help you." The next morning, Samuel woke to the smell of coffee brewing and bacon frying. He found Catherine in his kitchen, having prepared a hearty breakfast with ingredients from his well-stocked pantry. "I hope you do not mind," she said with a slight blush. "I wanted to repay your hospitality in some small way, and I noticed you had the makings for a proper meal." Samuel was amazed by the transformation in his kitchen. Not only had Catherine prepared an excellent breakfast, but she had also organized his somewhat haphazard cooking supplies and cleaned everything to a spotless condition. "This is wonderful," Samuel said, genuinely touched by her thoughtfulness. "I have not had a meal like this in years." Over breakfast, they discussed Catherine's situation more practically. The storm had passed, leaving behind clear skies and manageable roads, but her fundamental problem remained unchanged. "Catherine," Samuel said carefully, "I have a proposition that might benefit both of us, if you would be willing to consider it." Catherine looked at him with cautious interest. "This ranch requires more work than one person can reasonably manage alone. I need someone who can help with the household management, meal preparation, and the dozens of tasks that keep a place like this running smoothly. You need employment and a place to stay. What if we were to make a practical arrangement?" "What kind of arrangement?" Catherine asked. "I would offer you room and board, plus a fair wage, in exchange for managing the household side of the ranch operation. You would have your own quarters, complete independence, and the respect due to any valued employee. There would be no expectations beyond the work we agree upon." Catherine was quiet for a long moment, clearly considering the proposal from all angles. "Mr. Crawford, that is a generous offer, but I must ask, what would happen if you decided to marry? Would I be expected to leave?" Samuel had been wondering the same thing himself. "I suppose that would depend on the circumstances. But I have been alone for 8 years by choice. I am not actively seeking a wife. And if I decided to leave for other opportunities, then you would leave with my blessing and whatever references you needed." Catherine extended her hand across the table. "Mr. Crawford, I accept your offer." What began as a practical arrangement quickly proved to be one of the best decisions either of them had ever made. Catherine threw herself into managing the household with efficiency and creativity that amazed Samuel. She reorganized his storage systems, improved his meal planning, and created comfortable spaces throughout the cabin that made it feel like a real home rather than just a place to sleep. More than her practical contributions, however, Catherine brought companionship and intellectual stimulation that Samuel had not realized he had been missing. Their evening conversations by the fire covered everything from books and politics to plans for improving the ranch operations. After 3 months of this arrangement, Samuel realized that his feelings for Catherine had grown far beyond those of employer and employee. But he was reluctant to complicate their successful partnership by introducing romantic complications. The issue came to a head one evening in early spring, when Catherine announced that she had received a letter from a friend in Colorado offering her a teaching position. "It would mean leaving here," Catherine said quietly, "but it is the kind of opportunity one had been hoping for." Samuel felt his heart sink at the thought of losing her, but he forced himself to respond supportively. "That sounds like a wonderful opportunity. You should certainly consider it." "The thing is," Catherine continued, "I have been happier here than I have been anywhere else in my adult life. This arrangement has given me not just security, but purpose and friendship. I find myself reluctant to leave." Samuel looked up from his coffee with hope he tried to keep out of his voice. "You would be welcome to stay as long as you wish." "Samuel," Catherine said, using his first name for the first time, "what if we were to change our arrangement? What if instead of employer and employee, we were to become partners in every sense of the word?" Samuel felt his heart racing. "Catherine, are you saying what I think you are saying?" "I am saying that I have come to care for you deeply, and I believe you feel the same way about me. I am saying that perhaps two people who have both been disappointed by life might find happiness together." Samuel reached across the table and took her hand. "Catherine, I have been in love with you for months, but I was afraid to risk our friendship by telling you." "And I have been hoping you would," Catherine replied with a smile that transformed her entire face. 6 months later, Samuel and Catherine were married in the little church in Cedar Falls, with half the town in attendance. The same community that had once been the site of Catherine's disappointment now celebrated her happiness as she married not the man she had come to find, but the man she had been meant to find all along. As they danced at their wedding reception, Catherine reflected on how dramatically her life had changed from that snowy night when she had knocked on a stranger's door, desperate and alone. "Do you ever regret how we met?" Samuel asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Never," Catherine replied firmly. "Mr. Brennan's rejection was the best thing that ever happened to me. It led me to you, and to a life better than any I could have imagined. Even though it started with you having nowhere else to go." Catherine smiled up at her new husband. Sometimes having nowhere else to go is exactly where you need to be to find where you belong. Years later, as they watched their own children play in the yard of the ranch they had built together, Samuel and Catherine often spoke of that winter night when a stranded traveler had knocked on his door. What had begun as a simple act of hospitality had grown into a partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and deep affection. Their story became a favorite tale in Cedar Falls, proof that sometimes the most meaningful relationships begin not with grand romantic gestures, but with simple human kindness offered to someone in need. And sometimes the person you are meant to spend your life with arrives not when you are looking for them, but when you are simply trying to do what is right.